best entertainment on the earth. Tune in for Comics with Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. There's nothing like a long story. I enjoy really digging into a comic that's going to take a long time to play out. But in fairness, when I say that, I am expecting a lot of things to happen in that long story. I'm not expecting a 24-page comic where decompressed storytelling has got them eating dinner or playing a baseball game or a card game over, a quarter of those issues. I do expect something to happen. Ten of Swords was a good example of there are some action moments in that series, but aside from the first issue, which had a bit, and the last issue, which had a bit, very little happens in the middle. And it's 24 issues of that. I think 24 or 22 issues in the middle where not a lot is going on. And it's both decompressed and it's pointless storytelling. And the frustrating part is that this big kind of epic battle they have at the end could have been 3 or 4 issues. And, with proper storytellers, it would have been 3 or 4 issues. Instead, it got crammed into one. And you're left kind of wondering, why did we spend 2 issues on dinner when the entire giant battle is supposed to determine the fate of all reality and the humans and mutant kind? Like, why was that crammed into, less than 20 pages? Like, what gives? But this is a viewer question that kind of touches on the same thing. And I think that's the fundamental difference is what we're getting at. So it says, Dear Perch, I know you love long-term storytelling. I really do. But I think there's this weird issue with that. Only comes up in comic books. I can only read one floppy at a time. I love one. And done in one shots make me feel like I paid my money's worth for this single issue. Don't get me wrong. I love longer OGNs and trades. But it feels like that's all there is right now. Like you're not buying a single story with a beginning, middle, and end, i.e. a full product, but you're buying into something bigger you might not be interested in. I don't feel long stories in general are to blame, but I think Warren Ellis's decompressed storytelling is the reason. Instead of a beginning, middle, and end, fight scenes, drama, great villain within 22 pages, it's better that I trade wait for a full story. Also, some of my favorite stories are done in one. Case in point, people say they love Galactus trilogy or the Inhuman saga but personally, my favorite from that era is the issue This Man, This Monster. Thanks for the videos. So first of all, there's a lot of great done-in-one comics, no doubt about it. And I think there is some value. In fact, a lot of people who got really into comics got into them from a trade paperback. This is not a point that people make very often, but a lot of big X-Men readers came into it from reading the Dark Phoenix saga. Not as individual issues, though, but because they picked up the trade, they had this more or less complete story there. There's a little bit in how they package that trade where you get some of Proteus in there, and you're like, what's going on? Who is this guy? And so you find yourself going back to try and figure out, what was a lead into the story. But by and large, a lot of fans, a lot of comic readers come into it from a trade. And the value to the trade is they are getting that bigger, giant story, but they're getting it all at once. They can sit down, read through it beginning to end. They don't get interrupted. They don't, read an issue, and then there's 40 other comics that they also read, and then they kind of come back to it. That is one of the issues, and it is one fundamental reason why people trade rate. But the other thing that goes on is kind of what you touched on with decompressed storytelling, but also just these crossovers where it does not feel like there's a lot of momentum to this comic. I mean, I think we need a new term. There's done in one, where you've got a comic book with a beginning, middle, and end. And Jonathan Hickman said his X-Men issues were going to be done in one. And they kind of were. There was a complete-ish story, but unfortunately it was also fractured and fragmented. It wasn't carrying over into the next issue, but it wasn't exactly satisfying as a done-in-one issue either. It wasn't a complete story. I think a lot of there's lots of great kind of stories that get told in one comic, but I think the key there is that the writer had enough material for one comic and just one comic. So the writer said, you know what, we're going to tell this story beginning, middle, and end in this single comic. We're not going to drag it out into multiple comics. I think that's one factor. But the other thing is, I think there's a lot of writers today that do not have the material for even one comic. They've got like half of a comic's idea. It's like I heard this described to me once by a writer who's doing more successful now. It kind of makes me sick that they are. But she had said, there's all this action in the comic. And what I want to do is take a breather. And they always reference like the baseball games and the X-Men. It's like, we need to do a breather where you just kind of, decompress. You get to learn you get to do some character work. And the baseball games in the X-Men were classic at this. But the baseball games in the X-Men, when Claremont was doing them, it was like 2 pages, maybe 3 pages, and at least one of those pages was Cyclops getting super horny for Psylocke. Like every time, it's like, look at those things jiggle when she runs to get the ball. That's like a lot of what was going on there, and then Jean Grey getting angry. But regardless, I mean, it was a couple pages. But now, what you have is writers going, I really want one of those kind of moments where everybody takes a breather and takes a break before I get in some action. But I don't really have ideas for action. So I'll just make this breather last the whole issue because, hey, what was really cool was when we got some character work in X-Men in those 2 to 3 pages. But it'd be even better if that character work was, lasted 20 pages. Like, why can't the comic be entirely about, characters kind of getting to know each other over dinner? And maybe what we do is like, character has a problem, character wants to go eat, character is going to meet a friend to go eat, they go eat. A villain decides to rob the restaurant for silly reasons, and it turns out the heroes are there, so they punch them. They're like, man, we're always getting interrupted when we eat. Now we need to go to get a whole new dinner because we were interrupted. And then they go to a bar and they have more drinks, and the end. It's kind of the plot from that Captain Marvel comic I read. It was like the villains keep interrupting us trying to get food and trying to dance. Damn it, villains. But in general, I think that comics. Well, you're making a couple points here. So the first point is, look, if the writer has only enough material for one story, just tell it in one story. Don't drag it out. And if you don't have enough, material for even one comic, then get out. You don't know. You come back when you can write better comics. Like, I'm sorry. Then the second point you make is kind of a more interesting one, or not more interesting, but kind of one I don't hear very often, which is how, as comic readers, how complicated does it get to be when these stories kind of stretch on and on and on? If I'm reading lots of different comics, doesn't that get confusing or frustrating over time? And, wouldn't it be nice not to have all these spinning plates all the time? And that's not how I like to read comics, but I think I get your point. And I think that they're probably, look, if you're looking at Marvel or you're looking at DC or Image or even an indie, you should kind of try and sort out your line. We talked about, doing genres with your comics. Well, another thing you can do is have a comic where it's done in one. Have I joke about all the ongoing Avengers titles, but you should have a Marvel Comics Presents. Like, why not bring that back? And have it like they're all done in one stories. And maybe, to kind of, but you need to make sure you're marketing the right thing. You're not marketing like, hey, you'll never know who shows up in the next issue. That's a stupid way to market. The way you should market it is, hey, do you like good action stories where, there's real important things happening, actual stakes, stuff that happens in this comic will matter to the character's life, but all the stories are complete. So you buy one issue, you read it, you're going to get something meaningful, you're going to get, change to the character, but at the end of the story, it's going to be the end of the story. And then you can put it down, you can go to the next one. And, maybe even market it as like, hey, we don't expect you to pick up every issue. Of course, they hope you do. And frankly, if they market it this way, people will, because they just want to see stories where things happen and you're guaranteed to get kind of action and resolution. And you say, this comic is going to have Hawkeye one issue, and then the next issue is going to be Wolverine, and the next issue is going to be a Silver Surfer, and the next issue is going to be Black Widow, and then in will come Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, and then you'll get, who knows, a D-Man, whatever. If you've got a D-Man story that is powerful, compelling, and will sell some copies, more power to you. But every month, you're going to get a brand new character in a one and done story, and we promise these are not throwaway stories. You're not going to see like, Captain Marvel wants to get dinner with her bestie Monica Rambeau, and the Rhino decides to rob a bagel store and he gets punched. Like, you're going to get actually something meaningful to the origin, to the story, and actually not just the heroes, villains too. Here's a done in one story where Doctor Doom is going to learn some new power, and it's going to, be meaningful for him. And then he emerges at the end a more deadly threat. And then, if you want to read more, head on over to Fantastic Four because he's going to try to get that dastardly Richards one more time. I mean, that would probably be a good idea. And again, when you're publishing 80 plus comics a month, why not do that? If you're an indie, why not market a title like that? Like, hey, we're going to tell just good superhero stories, 22 pages, you get it. We're not going to do an anthology where you get like a hint of a story. You're getting a full story done in one. That's the gimmick. Show up, get a full story, leave. That's probably a decent. I mean, Ice Cream Man to some extent does that. You get a character study, if you will, of something that's vaguely horror related. And it's a done in one story every month. It's been pretty good. That's what you get, and it works. I think that I think that whole premise and that whole idea can really work, and it will meet the demands of readers like yourself who do not want to have these things stretch on forever. And that sounds great. And then also, I think that, stories that stretch on and are ongoing, I mean, I love those kinds of stories, but I certainly don't love them if I get the feeling like the writer's just trying to pad the comic because they don't have a real destination point in mind and we're just going to keep going for no apparent reason. So thank you very much for the mail. I appreciate you writing in and always appreciate all these questions. And let me know what you think. What kind of comics do you want? Do you read? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe. And thanks for listening.